I'm Steven, and today I will be showing you a little bit about how to use the FontParts API to manipulate a UFO font source in a variable font project. Or it doesn't have to be a variable font project, it could actually be any font project. FontParts is useful for a lot of reasons and a lot of things that I won't really cover in this video. I think like a lot of the API is for actually other software developers to use in their tools. Whereas there's also just like a bunch of things that are useful more as a type designer for me to manipulate a UFO font in code rather than by hand. So, they even have, actually, this is an improvement from what used to be available, a getting started page. And this is actually kind of pretty apropos for what I'll be covering in this video today. Basically, I am going to be creating a tracking axis and trying to build a variable font with that to see what it's like. And ultimately, this will be for my project Chantel Sands, which is based on the artist Chantel Martin. Her handwriting will be kind of, is the inspiration for this font. And it's got a few really fun axes to sort of mess with the type and potentially be something that would be fun to animate. And Chantel's writing often is actually really spaced out or really tracked out, as we might say in typography. So I'm going to be adding an axis that would be for tracking. Of course, I'm not going to start by adding it to the entire variable font right out of the gate. Instead, I'm going to be working just within the extra bold style, and I'm going to be working to duplicate the extra bold source or UFO into a new UFO, add tracking to all of the glyphs, and then see how that works if I build it into a variable font. And then the way I understand it, that single source with the added tracking should hopefully be able to be added into the entire variable font rather than, say, making a tracking axis for each individual source of the variable font. So, yes, it's always useful to start with baby steps. And in fact, I will start with the getting started script here because, you always have to figure out how to open the font. And I often end up referencing other code I have to do this. So I'm pretty glad that they added this here. So let's see, I've actually already prepared a tracking axis test with the extra bold source and just straight up duplicated extra bold tracked source. And we'll see. I think first I'll try to just track this out with the script in FontParts, and then the next stage would be not starting with this UFO, but duplicating it and saving it with the updated file path. And then I don't know if it'll be in this video or just probably more in the future. I'll add this to a much bigger build script I have, which does a lot of other build preparation using FontParts actually to generate the bounciness and save UFOs to generate the final variable font. So a cool thing about FontParts here is that it's allowing me to start with just 4 sources that are made by hand and then expand those into actually 8 sources, which are made with 4 sources made in code. But anyway, that's a little bit ahead of myself. Today, I am literally going to be creating a FontParts file. So we'll just do it all in the same folder to make it simple. Track out. Let me boost the size of my type here to hopefully make it a little bit better for a video. Track out UFO. So this is a Python file. I need to get into my virtual environment where I have already installed FontParts. So here I'm in the terminal. Let's see. I think I'm using pip env in this project. I usually use just the usual venv, but because I'm using pip env, I need to reference how to get in there. All right. Great. Now I'm in there. And let's check out the get status. Okay, it's just showing me that I've added this new folder. And I'm working in a branch today, so I can do a lot of experiments potentially, and then bring those over once they're successful, or leave them out of the project if for some reason it's just very unsuccessful. Yeah, so usually you would do pip install FontParts just to get started. And cool, it's just basically saying I already have all the requirements. In a way, you'd think that maybe this should include a little bit of information for installation. Maybe I'll try to do a pull request on the FontParts docs eventually later to update that. Let's see. So, right, I've got it installed. Great first step. I've got this. I'm going to add a doc string. The doc string is going to say something like track out a UFO by adding margin to all glyphs. Now, I actually probably don't want to add a margin to every single glyph because, for instance, the two things that I could see going wrong are, one, a lot of combining accents are supposed to be just a zero width glyph. And then two, a lot of the time, if you just add margin to glyphs, you can run into problems. For instance, if you add a lot of margin to the A glyph, that might misalign all of your composed glyphs that use A. So like A acute, A grave, A diareses, etc. Might shift out of alignment if you don't do it right. So let's just start with this and see what happens. So we're going to open, I'll extend this script to be a little smarter later, but let's just kind of hard code things for now. I think I would get the whole relative path because I'll be running this script from the root of the repo. Copy relative path, Python 3, doop. Oh, we'll actually need to save it as well. Font.save. And let me make a git commit actually before I run this so I can see exactly what changes once I run the script. So set up test files for tracking experiment. And I'll publish the branch. Okay, so now I'll run the script. All right, I love it. Already a problem. Let's boost this a little bit. Unsupported operand types for plus and none type and int. So probably it's like looking at a space or a glyph that doesn't have any margin at all, something like that. And so it's trying to have this none and then add something which can't be done. So we're going to swap it out for a try, except, and there's a snippet I meant to commit to memory recently where you should usually do like except, oh, okay, well, we'll just do this for now. Except type error, pass. All right, I'm actually going to look up this snippet because I know it's a useful thing that one should know about try except. So I'll run it and then I'll look it up. All right. But basically this try and except will try to add a margin to every glyph, and if it fails with this type error none plus, it'll just pass that glyph and keep moving on. So it did indeed change a bunch of glyphs, And I think I'll just open that file in RoboFont to quickly get a visual for how it's actually looking. Oh, you know what? This is really hard to tell because it's such a small... I'm going to do like 190. Make it really noticeable. Well, I'll do 90. Screw it, 190. Okay, I'm going to run it again. Running, cool. And update, please. Okay, really interesting. Indeed, all of the... Well, not all, but many of these composed glyphs are messed up. So if we look at the basic form, checking out the basics. This looks fine. Looks great. But if I like start to type these, they look mostly good, but basically they're shoved all the way to the side. So like the E here has 434, but this E is more centered. So ideally we would want the center of the E acute to be the same exact thing as the regular E acute. Or this D caron is an interesting situation because for some reason that caron, probably because it's a component itself. So there's all sorts of little tricky situations we need to account for actually in this script. And that'll be the real fun of it. Okay, so after the jump, I did look up this question I had about how to handle exceptions in Python so you can print out the exception you're getting. And basically, Python try except print error. And then I found a Stack Overflow question that seemed relevant. This is a lot of Python for me, is Googling the thing I'm trying to do. And then, yeah, so instead of just saying try this and then accept anything, pass, we can say accept exception as E, print... We could just print E, but then that only prints this message, like unsupported operand type, and it doesn't tell us what kind of error it is, which can be useful, because maybe you want to have different, I think you can do this, I'm almost positive, different exception blocks for different types of errors. Yeah, so basically I also wanted to know which glyphs that was on, and this REPR, so I could return the canonical string representation of the object. Basically, this REPR thing tells me type error, and then yeah, this glyph name tab just is there to show where it's happening. And yeah, indeed, it's on things like the space, which don't have margin because there's nothing drawn in them. These are empty glyphs, I believe. So let's see. Also, I've run this script a few times to like get this accept thing correct. And each time I'm just literally opening and saving to the same UFO. So if we go over to RoboFont, it's going to look probably a little bit silly now. Like, yeah, super wide, right? So, I mean, I'm curious, how much side bearing? Okay, 1,000 units on either side. That's a little more than I think we'll ever want. Maybe about double. So it's obviously not sustainable because I'm going to have to run this script like 100, 200, 300 times maybe while I'm developing this whole thing. So a thing I do early on is often opening one font, like extra bold, and then saving it into a UFO fresh. So let me try that. I will just use this URL or path here for the extra bold normal font, and then I'll save it into here. And I think this will overwrite this font, but let's find out. So I'm going to run this again, and now we'll see, hopefully, update. Hopefully this has been overwritten with like glyphs that haven't been added. Yeah, perfect. So these glyphs are now back to like a reasonable place of tracking. Okay, so next issue we have, oops, I'm going to continue my time tracking. Next issue we have is all all things that are shifted in undesirable ways. So like the decaron happening because this has, let's think about this for a second. If we go to the components in Karen comb, we see that that was given a bunch of extra space to the right, and then this is just given a bunch of extra space. I don't know. I don't want to do the mental gymnastics. My thought is, if we could probably, because this is ultimately intended for a piece of a build prep script that will be in a build where any components that are rotated or scaled will be decomposed, because rotated or scaled components that make it into a final font can cause some like printing issues, for instance, because PostScript does not handle those components well. Because this will be in a build that decomposes things, I'm going to try adding a decomposition step in this script for any scaled or flipped components. And I'm wondering, like, what's the simplest way to do that? I bet I can use FontParts. I bet I could find a snippet of code online, because I know, for instance, that UFO to font, which is part of the whole font make build chain, that has a tag you can put into a UFO's lib to say that you want to decompose, scaled, flipped. Okay, decompose transformed components. So potentially, if I can't figure this out easily, I might, you know what? Life is short. Let's just check if there's a really good example right off the bat. UFO to font. We'll search within here. Filters. Where would this be? Okay. Pretty short block of code. Wow. So I guess this is using some font tools stuff. Oh boy. This would take a fair bit of like digging around for me to properly understand. I do wonder what this identity thing means. Guess there's a way to find out. What does that mean? Transform instance set to the identity transformation. Yeah. I'm just kind of reading this. So this sets up a list for transformed components. It's going through, well, presumably something passes in a glyph. This makes a list of any transformed components in the glyph. Well, it checks if there are any components in the glyph. That makes a lot of sense. Makes a list, goes through the components. This must just be checking if there's a transformation happening for things from the end of the 6. So like component transformations are in a matrix, which has 6 numbers. And basically, a non-transformed thing looks like 1 0 0 1 0 0. I think the final 2 might be the X and Y transformation. We can actually look in RoboFont actually. So let's check out what some of these transformations look like. So for instance, if we open up this inspector panel, all right, great. So this is showing the transformation matrix. And so like the D has a pretty simple these both do actually. They only have X or X and Y transformations, which PostScript handles pretty fine as far as I know. But here, for instance, this matrix is showing this -1 0 0 -1. That means something was, I think, rotated 180 degrees. So that's a problem. Let me Google. I think there's like a cheat sheet. So like matrix transformation. Oops. Cheat sheet. Let me see if this pulls up a good thing. It might. I saw one at one point that was really great, and I'm suddenly wishing I had saved it. Wow, it's a potato. Terrible image. Wow. All right, then we're gonna try that again. Much better. This is probably, well, still a problem because this is not really giving us 6 digits. There's got to be an easier way to see this. All right, literally Colin Ford tweeted about this one, so we're going to look for the Twitter advanced search and see if this helps us. Matrix from Colin. I think it's just Colin Ford. Colin Ford. What is his Twitter name? Does he have 2 L's in his name? Colin M. Ford. Okay, let me try this again. Aha. No. Nope. Let's say transformation. Aha! Okay. So it was the one that I just found. So now I have to understand it. So I think, all right, so this no change is a good example. I think the 6 digits must be this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. So like I see, reflect about the origin. This is kind of the 180 flip. Yeah, so it's -1, 0, 0, -1, 0, 0. All right, these are really helpful. So basically, though these don't talk about scaling. Oh yeah, it does. So I think that if the first or fourth digit are not 1, the thing is either reflected or scaled and should be decomposed. Let's take a look. We could test this obviously. So let me go to anything with a component, and then let me scale this. Sure. Yeah, perfect. So this does show that like the fourth digit here is no longer 1. All right, so in our tracked out, let's borrow some of this code or just reference it real fast. So if not glyph components, we could just do a pass. Let's make a new definition, right? Decompose. Flipped. All right, so this will take a glyph. If not, this will check pass. I think even return would be what we'd want to do here, just to exit out of this function. All right, and then we'll say for component. We could do this thing making a list, but I don't have a lot of components in any of these glyphs, so I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. For component in glyph.components, if component.transformation, so I'm going to reference. All right, so when you're actually digging into FontParts, I can't believe this took me so long to get into it. There's this object reference page, and this is the thing that I go through all the time. So I want to know about components, for instance, and how to transform them. So I mean, I could also search, but I'll go here, click on components, and then often I'll like do Command F to search within the page. Transform. Okay, base component dot transformation. Nice. Okay, so a great thing about FontParts is that it's kind of intuitive a lot of the time. You could, fairly easily guess that dot transformation would give you the transformation, but often it's useful to check anyway. So we want the first digit of the transformation isn't 1, or the fourth, which would be index 3, isn't 1. Sorry about my use of code ligatures, but that was actually a pretty nice example of where code ligatures can be helpful. I mean, I guess I do get a red little squiggly line from something in my code editor telling me that that's not correct Python, but it's a lot easier for me to know that I've gotten the correct thing if I type exclamation equal and my code editor or my font represents that as a recognizable does not equal sign. And of course, if I were to change the font, it just, it still is actually the two glyphs that it needs to be in the code. So it runs completely normal. If you read it in another font, or if you turn off code ligatures, it's no longer like that. So pretty nice feature. I wonder, can I even just turn off code ligatures from here? Guess not. Oh well. I bet component. I think. Let's just verify here. Decompose. Yep. It's just like this. Decompose. We'll decompose the component. All right. So let's try adding this to our for glyph and font loop here, and we'll save the result, and we'll see if, for instance, oops, opened metrics machine. We will see if the D Karen and A Karen are starting to look any better. I don't think it'll fix too many more things, but those will be two signs of progress. All right, and I don't actually need to print out, well, whatever. Yes, I want to update, thank you. Darn. Well, all right, the other sign of progress. Okay, I think this was not formally decomposed, but let's check this. All right, we'll skip that step. We'll run it again without this function running. And if I go over here, okay, nice. It did catch that. It did decompose it, which is useful, but still not quite enough. But it's a good start. So now I have to think of what else would be useful. Okay, so I mean, for one thing, I want to, let me make this a little more formal. I want it to be a little simpler to say what amount of tracking I'm trying to add, or what amount of extra margin I'm trying to add. So let's first add margin equal margin glyph and margin. And then we'll just add this to our loop here. We'll pop this guy up here, and we'll replace this and this. My thought basically is that maybe the simple thing here is that after I've moved the base glyphs, I could potentially just transform these backwards to kind of correct the movement. So let's see. I'm going to just run it again to make sure that this is working. Save that, run it again. Oh, margin is not defined. Okay, of course. Later I'll add this as like a command line argument, I think. But for now, we'll just do that. Oh. Let's view this in Finder, pop it open again. You know what? That did fix the D Karen. That's awesome. Okay. Nice. Okay. I think I was looking at a like non-updated glyph view representation, but that actually fixed a number of things. I think the L Karen was also maybe messed up. The L slash I know was messed up. okay, it's still messed up. So this didn't fix everything. I think in these instances, yeah, the glyph was given extra margin, but then the component also has extra margin. So what we need to do is move components backwards and not like change the margin of composed glyphs. So let's try that again. And equal margin. Where should we do it? I mean, just in a row. Move components left, not backwards, by margin amount. Correct components. Glyph. So now we will make this up here. Oops. I mean, we could potentially cue this from like this definition. I feel like it's slightly more clear to have it down here, because otherwise we're like queuing this and then queuing another. Whereas here we can kind of, we'll have this main function in our font or in our script, and we can read like kind of step by step what we're doing. And maybe that's a little more obvious. So if not glyph components, let's use this handy thing again. Just skip anything with components, and then for component in glyph components, we'll need to have our margin here again, actually. And need to add that argument into this function. And then let's reference font parts again. So how do we move this? I think we'd have to adjust the, oh, okay, maybe there's a transform by. Move by. This might be it. Let's try this move by thing. All right, so move by, oops, oh, go away. Move by negative margin. And I think this might do it. What we'll be looking for is for like the L slash to look right, and all of these composed glyphs to kind of be recentered. Fingers crossed. That might be what we want. So if we update it, yes, that works perfectly. So almost perfectly. Of course, there's always a problem. Now, what? Now the current comp. It kind of like shifted twice. That's pretty funny. Was that sort of happening before somehow? You wouldn't think it would shift twice, because like it was, this is almost working so well. You wouldn't think it would shift twice because like we already decomposed it and like had it working properly. Let's see if we can like inspect it or think through the logic at least. Oh, you know what? Maybe what's happened is that, no, this should be fine because we're not directly resetting the transformation. We're using this move by, so you would expect that that move by would work well. It's almost like maybe we need to save the font and then run this and save it again. That seems like it'd be slightly slow, but could potentially work. Or maybe there's some sort of way we can like glyph.update or something like that to like mark. Oh, we definitely don't want to save the font in every glyph, because that would be way, it seems like it would be a lot of extra work. What? Let's go to this Karen comb. The other thing we should do is in this add equal margin, let's not add equal margin if the glyph width is 0. So this should hopefully avoid scaling anything with that is like a combining accent. So if glyph dot width equals 0, we're gonna return. Okay. I don't think this will necessarily fix the Karen thing, but we'll know if it's working correctly because our combining accents should have no added space. So, and actually up here I noticed that all of these spacing accents are pretty much centered except for the Karen, which is moved backwards. So that's definitely a thing. Maybe that would help us. Aha. No. Maybe that would help us to see what's going on. Okay, it does. Sort of. So this is a regular combining accent, and it's right in the middle. I mean, it should be 0, but it's in the middle. So that means that margin was added equally to both sides, whereas Karen comb is to the left, so it's basically as if margin was added twice, or like as if this were decomposed after it was moved incorrectly. Just for a quick check, I want to make sure that the Karen is looking okay in the usual source here. Karen comb, yeah, it's right in the middle. And then it references this, which is also in the middle. So it, that's looking how I would expect it to. Yeah, it's almost like it's not decomposing it before it adds this equal margin. Well, anyway, we'll try this skipping glyph with 0. Maybe, I don't think that will fix it, but it'll fix something. So let's try it. It's good to go step by step, change only a little bit each time. That tends to be a really helpful way to code. All right. Hilariously, that's so funny. Hilariously, that seemingly broke everything again, because suddenly the accents are no longer twice as wide. They're back to 0. So they almost need to be double transformed. Oh, God. Or no, they're being moved backwards. So maybe they need to be not moved backwards. This is pretty tough. I have to reference the base glyph, and if the base glyph has a positive width, then I move it backwards or leftways. If it has 0 glyph width, I don't move it. I don't know if there's a simpler way, but let's plug on. Component, there's a way to get the base of it, the parent glyph, base glyph, the name of the glyph that the component references. There's also like, I think just glyph or something shows what glyph the component is in. So those two things are different and useful to realize. But we want the component, we want the glyph that the component references. So we'll say if component base glyph, is it the name or the glyph? It's really useful to, okay, it's the name. It's useful to know the difference between getting a glyph name and a glyph object, because you can like manipulate a glyph object, but if you're just getting the glyph name, you have to reference it first. So we actually have to pass in font here, so that we can use the name of the glyph that we're manipulating. So if font, this will give us the glyph object. We say font, and then we say font object, and then the listy thingy or the dictionary lookup thing, and then width is not 0. Okay. Fingers crossed. This will uncorrect the issue we just caused by making combining glyphs 0 again. Let's update. Nice. Okay, these are back. Did that also correct the Karen? This is probably really obvious if you're watching the video, but for me right now narrating things, it's so easy to forget like exactly what was the problem 2 minutes ago. Okay, that's pretty funny that it still gives extra width but seems to be working. Let me look at some of the other circumflex comb. That's actually still getting extra width. What the heck? All right, I'm going to close out of this font just to make sure I'm looking at the most up-to-date thing of it, just in case for some reason I'm not. Yeah. Let's check. Okay. Okay, cool. So that's pretty obnoxious, but sometimes RoboFont doesn't properly show the exact current state of the file, I guess. But this is looking really good, and like I don't see anything right now that is not looking how I expect it to look, which is pretty cool. So the last thing I'm going to do before actually testing a build here, let's give it a proper big margin amount so that our tracking max value of 1000 will actually add 1000 units. We'll see how that looks, and may or may not. It might be like way too much. Let's it's a lot. See how it looks. Oh, actually, this is a pretty interesting thing that it shows. When I add this much tracking, I see that the space actually needs to be bigger, because otherwise now with all this tracking, the spaces, you almost don't even see that they're there anymore, which is kind of a funny outcome. Because when we're adding equal margin, we can't add margin to a glyph without margin. So actually, this is where we should actually finally use our type error here. Glyph.width equals plus margin times 2. And just for clarity, I'll wrap this here. Okay. I think I can leave off that. Unless this would like report other exceptions, but these are all type errors. This isn't a video about perfectly using errors or exceptions. Let's see if this corrects our spaces. I think it should. All right, and just nice. Cool. So this is now looking as we want it to. So now I get to test the actual build, which is pretty exciting. So I've set up this tracking. All right, so I've set up this design space to reference the extra bold and the extra bold tracked in the same directory, and I've set it to have a tracking axis 0 to 1000. And yeah, so I think all I have to do at this point is to say font make output variable. And I just, okay, if you've never used font make before, this isn't about how to use font make, but you can do font make -- help and see all the options. I also use like pip to install this. So yeah, so output variable, we want a design space, and I think I already copied the name. Cool. And let's see. Oh no. It can't find a neutral master in the design space document. Why? Oh, because I still have these labeled as weight rather than tracking. Let's try again. It's looking for features files. Well, I guess I could just update that. Oh. Where would the features be relative to this? So I think we'd go like this would be 1 dot, because we can look at, yeah, so in the main one, it's just 1 dot and referencing a feature folder at the same level. But here we're up 2 levels, I think. So we want to go 1 dot, 2 dots if the features was in experiments, and 3 dots, or well, that is like that. Let's see if this works. And we'll do that. Well, you know what? I should be able to just rerun the Python rather than copying and pasting that manually. Cool. Now I'll try this font make thing. Cool. Variable TTF. Let's see. Yes. So cool. We now have a tracking axis. And so, yeah, I next will try to add a tracking axis into a variable font setup with more sources and see whether that also works. So for instance, can I add 1 tracking source into a variable font with, say, 2 sources for weight, or 8 sources for weight, bounce, and irregularity? I think so. I've heard that is the case, and I have to simply test it out. Yeah, so that's next. Okay, actually, we can do a quick follow-up. So I had to do a little more work to make the build for the full font work again, because a lot of glyphs have been added to the character set, including Cyrillic, but only in some of the sources so far. So yeah, I basically needed to like make a set of sources that like had all of the non-compatible glyphs removed, and that took some doing. But the important part is this tracking axis now actually works in the full set of axes. So we've got our bounce, we've got our weight, we've got our irregularity, and critically, these things are kind of going through this semi-random or pseudo-random rotation of alternates, and the tracking works. So kind of the big reason this tracking axis makes sense to add to this font at all is that sometimes, like browsers, I believe, will kind of deactivate some features like contextual alternates if the tracking or letter spacing is changed. So this will allow users to, for one, edit tracking without kind of losing that randomness. And then beyond that, it's, probably just kind of nice. Like, not all software would necessarily have tracking, or if you're already using variable axes to animate a font, maybe in some cases it would be useful or easier to simply add another variable axis which you're animating. So maybe in Drawbot or something that will hopefully come in handy for somebody. So yeah, I'm pretty excited with how I did this. Ignore my desktop mess here. But basically, this was able to be done with only one additional source in the design space. And to show you that in a bit of a better way, this is the design space document, and it has its weight, irregularity, and bounce. But then I've added this tracking axis, sort of like we did in this much simpler design space. And then just one additional source. It doesn't actually need this. And critically, I learned if you're doing this, only adding one extra source to add an extra axis for a variable font. Because often when you add an extra axis, it means at least doubling the sources in your font. So if you add, say, an optical size axis to a weight variable font, usually that means you want to change the optical size outlines for all characters for each style. So say you have a 2-source weight axis, you'll probably need to make it 4 sources to add optical size or to add width or whatever. But tracking is able to be added with just one source, because all you're really doing is saying that all of the points have to move, say, 500 units to the right at the maximum value, and then all of the like, what would it be called in like font production? Advanced width, I think. All of those advanced widths have to be, added 500 units or whatever you've added in that one source. So it works, but it only works if all of the other axes are at the default locations. So because the default here is weight 300, irregularity, and bounce 0, this has to be those 3 defaults, and then the tracking maximum. If I tried this, I didn't record it, but I tried, for instance, adding the extra bold as, I don't think I recorded that, the extra bold at the maximum of this weight axis, and then having tracking, but that didn't actually like generate that sort of missing corner. It only sort of, well, I don't have the example on hand to show, but it didn't work in the way I wanted it to. It's necessary that the other axes have to be the defaults. But yeah, I'm pretty excited that this tracking is working really nicely with just one source, because that keeps the font size pretty small and allows these other axes to sort of work just as well as they can with sort of minimal, both minimal file size addition, but also minimal additions to the overall build for this font. So this tracking axis, I was able to, I haven't actually added it to the full font prep, but that'll be the next step. And it should be pretty simple, actually, because I'm really only generating one additional source, and the thing the video was about. I use the same script here, very basic script, with just the altered source and output fonts to work in the bigger design space. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully you found that helpful, and hope to share this with the world soon.